Welcome to the deep dive. Today we've got a stack of sources for a really compelling story from the Thai legal system. We're going to break down a landmark Supreme Court ruling.
Yeah, this is a Dika judgment, and it concerns a truly chilling case, the Serm Sakornrat murder.
And our mission here isn't just to go over the facts of a pretty gruesome crime. It's to understand how the judiciary works through the idea of criminal intent.
Exactly. We're looking at the razor-thin legal line between premeditation, planning and cruelty, or murder by torture. It all comes down to the defendant's state of mind.
The case, for context, it involves a former relationship between two university students, a 22-year-old male engineering student, and the victim, a 23-year-old female medical student, Mrs. Jenjira Ploy-ngunsri.
And the court established a very clear, very disturbing sequence of events. The defendant brought Miss Jenjira to his rented room.
And there he shot her in the head. The bullet went from the left temple to the right. But that single act, as awful as it is, was really just the beginning of the legal puzzle here.
It really was. Because what happened next is what makes this case so complex from a legal standpoint. Yeah. After the shot, he used a knife to dismember the body.
And the sources they're unflinching in the details. He cut her neck, removed her eyes, ears, nose, sliced the body into pieces. It's horrific.
And then came the concealment. It was incredibly calculated. He separated the parts, the bones and skull went into the Bangpakong River, while the flesh and organs were flushed down the toilet.
That separation, that process is so important, right? Because it speaks directly to intent.
It speaks to planning. And on top of destroying the body, he also stole her property. We're talking about 34,450 baht worth of items.
So not just cash. It was a watch, jewelry, a talking dictionary, a CD player. And then he tried to cover his tracks, hiding weapons, burning clothes, moving her car somewhere else.
It all just screams cover-up. The crime itself was horrific, but these subsequent acts, the theft, the concealment, they added layers of charges that really stacked up fast.
Okay, so to get to the Supreme Court's final word, we have to follow the path this case took. It actually shifted quite a bit in the lower courts.
It did. Let's start with the court of first instance. They found the defendant guilty of a number of crimes, but the big one was premeditated murder.
That's Section 289, Clause 4 in the Penal Code, right?
That's the one. And it carried the death penalty. But the court gave him a mitigation, a reduction of the sentence.
Why?
Because he offered a partial confession in court. So that knocked the sentence down by 1/3, from death to life imprisonment.
Okay, so life imprisonment, but then it goes to the appeals court, the Uthran court, and they look at the file and see something else.
They see something more. They upheld the premeditated murder conviction, but then they added another charge, a very serious one, murder by torture or cruel act.
Which is Section 289, Clause 5.
Exactly. And this is where the system has to really distinguish between two legally separate mental states. The appeals court looked at the dismemberment and said, the sheer brutality of that qualifies as a cruel act.
So they felt it was part of the murder itself, not just concealment.
Right, but here's the thing. Both charges carry the exact same maximum penalty, death. So even with the new charge, the sentence stayed the same, death reduced to life imprisonment.
So when the case finally gets to the Supreme Court, the Dika, there are these two huge questions on the table.
Two massive questions. The defendant is appealing the torture charge, saying it wasn't that. And at the same time, the prosecutor, who is actually the victim's mother, is appealing the sentence reduction. She's arguing there should be no mitigation at all.
Wow. Okay, so that sets the stage perfectly for the Supreme Court's decision. And they came out with something pretty surprising right away, didn't they?
They did. They ruled against the appeals court. They dropped the murder by torture charge.
So why? How did they make that distinction? Because to a layperson, what he did sounds incredibly cruel.
And it was. But legally, it all hinges on the defendant's intent for the acts that happened after the fatal shot. For it to be murder by torture, the intent has to be to make the victim suffer gravely until they die.
So the court is saying, even though the dismemberment was unimaginably brutal, the defendant's mental state during that act wasn't about prolonging her suffering.
Exactly. The Dika judges look at the sequence. The first act was the gunshot. That was designed to cause instant death.
Yeah.
So even if she wasn't clinically dead when he started cutting, the court decided that his reason for doing it, the dismemberment, the removal of parts, it was all done with one overriding goal.
Concealment.
Concealment. To destroy the corpse and hide the crime.
Wait, so the court is drawing a line? If your motive for mutilation is hiding evidence, it is legally not the same crime as if your motive is inflicting pain. That is an incredibly fine line.
It's the absolute heart of this judgment. Because the purpose was concealment, not protracted suffering leading to death, it didn't meet the legal standard for murder by torture. So the defendant, he actually won on that specific point.
That's fascinating. So the torture charge is out. But the big one, premeditated murder, the Supreme Court upheld that one, and strongly. How did they prove the planning?
They laid out really compelling evidence for what's called triad-prong meticulous planning. First, the weapons. The defendant was an engineering student. He had a gun and a very sharp knife in his small rented room.
And the court noted something important about that room, right?
Yes, it had no kitchen. So that completely dispels any argument that the knife was for cooking or that the weapons were just for self-defense.
So that suggests he had them for another purpose. But the planning went beyond just having the weapons.
Oh, absolutely. The court zeroed in on the disposal. I mean, think about it. A dismembered body it's a mess. It's bloody. It smells immediately. The court found that the defendant's ability to so quickly wrap, package, and dispose of everything.
Flushing parts down the toilet, dumping bones in a river.
It proved he must have planned it all. He had to have gotten the wrapping materials, the cloths, plastic bags, boxes, all ready to go in advance.
That level of logistical detail convinced them. This wasn't a spontaneous crime of rage. It was plotted.
Exactly. And that's what upheld the most severe charge, premeditated murder. Which brings us to the next point of appeal. The mitigation.
The crime of passion defense.
Right, or bandeltosa. The defendant argued he was severely provoked, that the victim was going to break up with him for someone else, and he just snapped.
And this is where the judgment goes from technical legal analysis to something else entirely. It becomes almost philosophical.
It really does.
Yeah.
Because the Supreme Court had to decide if a breakup, no matter how painful, could possibly count as the kind of grave, unjust provocation that legally warrants a reduced sentence.
And they rejected it.
Completely. And they did it by making this profound statement, defining what the court believes true love, quambra quaiki, actually is.
Okay, what did they say?
The court stated that true love involves goodwill, forgiveness, and a willingness to sacrifice your own happiness for the happiness of the person you love.
And they contrasted that directly with the defendant's actions.
Sharply. They ruled his act wasn't born from love or passion, but from pure self-interest and possessiveness, what the source calls hen kodua hen kodai.
So they're effectively saying, you don't get to claim this was about passion when your motive was selfish possession.
Precisely. They concluded that this kind of dangerous, self-serving possessiveness is a threat to society. Therefore, it could never be the kind of provocation that reduces a penalty. It was a complete philosophical shutdown of his defense.
So the premeditation is confirmed, the crime of passion defense is rejected. The final sentence is life imprisonment based on that premeditated murder charge with the initial reduction.
But there was still that one last piece, the appeal from the victim's mother. She was arguing there should have been no reduction from the death penalty at all.
And given everything we've heard, you can understand her position. So why couldn't the Supreme Court just reinstate the death penalty?
This came down to pure procedure. The Supreme Court said her appeal as a joint prosecutor was barred. There's a rule in the Criminal Procedure Code.
Okay, break it down for us.
Basically, if a sentence is already severe, and life imprisonment is obviously over the 5-year threshold, and the appeals court didn't increase the penalty, well, then the prosecution is forbidden from appealing on a point of fact, like whether the mitigation was appropriate.
So because the appeals court left the final sentence at life imprisonment, the prosecutor lost the right to challenge that original 1/3 reduction.
That's the procedural reality. It's one of those technical checks and balances in the system, even in a case this emotional. It shows that once a certain point is reached, the process is locked in.
So let's connect all these dots. What this landmark DICA judgment really gives us is, it's a masterclass in judicial detail. Premeditation was proven by logistics, the gun, the knife, the plastic bags.
But the charge of murder by torture was thrown out, because the primary intent during the most gruesome acts was concealment, not making the victim suffer until death. That focus on the precise mental state, the why, that's the key takeaway.
And this is where it gets really interesting, and it's our final thought for you to think about. The Supreme Court, in rejecting the crime of passion defense, basically gave an institutional definition of true love.
And in doing so, they condemned selfish possessiveness, which raises a huge question. In cases like this, how often does the judicial system use these moral and, philosophical definitions to reinforce social norms?
To actively reject certain emotional states as valid legal defenses, It's a reminder that the courts aren't just robots applying code, they're actively shaping society's moral framework with the very language they use.
It's a layer of complexity that goes so much deeper than just the black and white of the law. Food for thought. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.